Hello and welcome back again. This is Ms. Bushra with you, and I'm back again to complete where we stopped, which is muscle contraction in chapter 1, section 3. So let's start. The contraction of muscles starts at sarcomere level. That's the first thing we should know. Remember, we said sarcomere is the basic unit or the functional unit of the muscles. Here, everything happens. What can we find in sarcomere? We can find, it's between two Z lines, myosin and actins. So these two together, they're going to have an interaction and a way of, binding together, that it's ending up in shortening the entire muscle. There you can see it's getting shorter, but how? The first thing you need is a nerve impulse that is going to start the whole process. That's one. Without the nerve impulse, you don't have the process. So that's the first thing. Then let's see, upon this, what's going to happen? You could clearly see that we have these myosin between these actins. The head of the myosin is outward like that. But when the impulse comes, you see that it clearly attaches itself to the actin. Then it's going to move it inward. There you go. Move it inward on both sides to bring the actins with the Z lines closer to each other. I have like a drawing here prepared. Let's see. There you go. And let's try to use this as an example. There you go. Let's have the color palette here. These are myosins. I'm going to draw a relaxed muscle first. So a relaxed muscle have its heads like that, outward, not attached. But if a nerve impulse comes, I'm going to represent it with this one. It starts to attach to the actins like that. Remember, at the beginning it's facing outwards, but then it's connecting to the actin. Then what's going to happen after that? Remember, when the myosin tries to pull the actins together, the heads are moving inward, so you will see a shape like this. This is for a contraction, that the head's facing inwards like that. Without these heads, oval heads, there won't be any pulling. So you will always see that some of the actin is above the myosin so that the heads can pull on them. Let's move these. Check this out. These heads pull this actin closer, and this side also pull the actin closer. What do you see? Isn't this a shorter sarcomere? It is a shorter sarcomere. You can clearly tell. Another time, these heads are gonna detach themselves. Again, they detach this part. They are attaching to another point and bring it even closer. Okay, if I'm gonna make it like this, let's see. It's getting even closer like this. Sometimes they're even going to overlap. Oh, this is the only thing that, okay? But it gives you the idea of what happens. You see the space here shortened, that's one. Another thing, the entire structure is shorter. It's the difference, between the beginning and now. You can clearly see. Look, this is a contracted sarcomere. This is a relaxed sarcomere. The difference between these two, you can clearly see. Number one is that, the head of the myosins are facing inward. Another is the space between these two Z lines getting shorter. That's how you know. All right? As for the rest of it, how you describe it, in the book it describes it like that. Heads attach, so attachment first. Remember, nerve, stimulation, then attachment of oval heads to actin, and then, of course, pulling inward. the pulling. Muscles never push, they always pull. Keep that in mind because we would need it. Okay? Then after pulling, there is detachment. There's a note about detachment. Detachment needs ATP. Without ATP, there won't be detachment. So if somebody asked you, why do we need ATP? Why do we need so much energy for muscle working? It's for detachment. Even later for relaxation, the hairs need to detach from actin in order for us to relax our arms, and this is where you need ATP. And then after detachment, it's going to do it again and again and again like that. The cycle repeats itself. Each time it's getting shorter, shorter, and shorter. And there's a description here. It says that actin and myosin are always overlap, but during the contraction, the overlap increases. This is overlap, okay? This is overlap. But when overlap is like that, more areas are covered. We call this overlap increase. There you go. There are some notes here about how these two are working. And then there are some information here. It says the overlapping pattern, it gives the striation to the muscles. Remember, that overlap area is creating a darker shade while the others are paler. This is why the muscles look striated in the microscope. I mean, like the cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle, we talked about that. Another thing, the number of muscle fibers contributing in an action, okay, it depends its force and its size as well. Of course, a muscle with less muscle fiber will have, you know, a weaker pull. Another thing, the actin and myosin are complementary shape. Of course, if actin is here and myosin could not attach to it, then how come the pulling happens? It means that there is a dent or like a place for the head of the myosin in the actin for it to pull it. Another thing, again, this is important. All or none response. See, in a muscle, like for example your arm here, if one muscle contracts, all of them contracts with it in the same one. Not this and this. No, this is one muscle. All of them contract at the same time or none of them is going to contract. There's nothing like saying, oh, this section of sarcomere contracted, the rest of it don't. No, this muscle contracted, the others don't contract. No. It's nothing like that. So it's all a non-response. Either the fibers contract or they remain relaxed. There's nothing like this section is going to contract, the other relaxes. No. Then another thing, remember why muscle contraction and relaxation require energy? It's because of the detaching. Detachment requires ATP. Don't forget, the head when they're attached, they're stubborn. So for detaching it, we give it an ATP and then it leaves the actin. In the absence of energy supply, such as during death, how does this affect the muscle? There is something that we know about rigor mortis, which is when the dead people, after a while, they become stone-like, okay? This is because there is no more ATP in their body. They cannot create even more. The rest of it was used at the beginning, all right? So what happens, the body becomes in a constant contraction. However you leave them, they become like that. That's why they have to close their eyes quickly, because after a while they might never be able to close it properly. So the reason why, because we want to detach the head of myosin from actin. How can you contract your muscle tightly enough to lift a dumbbell or gently enough to lift a pen? It's all depending on number of muscle contributing in this. If more muscles contribute, you can lift something heavier. If smaller amount of muscles contribute, like this, I'm pulling this pen. So it's not about how is the contraction happening or how tight it is. It's about number of the cells contributing. So what we need to know about muscles in general is that muscles are working in pairs, usually in skeletal muscles. Why? because they can only pull, they can't push. When the myosin heads relax, they just detach. The action remains in the same. So another muscle should come and change the outcome of what happened. How? For instance, if there's a table here and I'm going to pull it, but I can't push it, it's banned. So what should we do in order to take it back? Somebody else on the other side should pull it back. This is how muscles are working in pairs. Those pairs called opposing pairs. An opposing pair is that you have muscle number 1 and muscle number 2. When one of them relax, the other can contract. When this one is contract, the other must relax like this. This is why they called opposing pairs, because they act differently and they're complementary in their action to each other. An example of a muscle, two muscles actually, they're opposing pair, is your bicep and then your tricep behind it. Bicep is here, where you're flexing with it, and tricep is here. See, these two have a lot of things they're working together, and there's like a wide range of terminology here that you're not familiar with. We need to explain it. Before that, we're going to talk about this. Muscles are attached to bones through tendons, or it could be directly. In this case, it's tendon, of course. But the way that they're attached to it, it gives them their names. For example, the bicep is attached in 2 points with the bones, so it's called a bicep. Tricep is attached in 3 points. That's why it's called a tricep, because tri means 3, bi means 2. However, they're also attached to 2 different bones. See, in case of the bicep, it's attached to the shoulder, going over the elbow, leaving the elbow, and extending over it, attaching to radius. If you sense both bones are not the same, if I'm like this and I'm moving my arm, the position of my bone in the shoulder doesn't change, but the radius is moving around. So that makes it a movable bone, while this is a stationary bone. A stationary is the one that is not moving, and a movable bone is the one that is moving its position with the movement of the muscle. So that stationary bone creates a point of attachment called origin. So the origin of bicep is scapula. There you go. Origin of bicep is scapula, because it doesn't move. It's a bone that doesn't move. And then the insertion, remember, insertion of bicep is radius. 2 points of attachment of 2 different bones. One of them, the bone doesn't move, we called origin. And another, the bone moves, we called insertion. Remember, they're points of attachment of muscle to bone. For tricep, it's not the same. This is bicep, by the way. This is the origin of bicep. There you go. It extends over the elbow. Elbow is here. And attach itself to the radius. This is the insertion of bicep. However, this is the tricep, by the way. Tricep also doing the same thing. This is tricep here, and this is tricep here as well. It's extending over the joint, attached this time not to radius but ulna. Here, ulna. Remember, radius is with the thumb, ulna is here with the pinky, so it's attached here. So insertion of tricep is different because it's ulna, while its origin is shared with the bicep. They're working opposite of each other. Let's see. Since their work will have different outcomes, like for example, contraction of bicep make your arm move upward and bend upward, but the contraction of tricep makes your arm straightens like that. This gives them a name. If a muscle, remember, muscle according to their work, that's skeletal muscle. If a muscle bends joint or straightens a joint, they will have different names. That muscle here, it's called a flexor. See? Let's make sure that this one is contracting. See? Flexor. This is where you flex as well. And then extensor means making it extended. So if this is contracting, it extends the arm. We call this extensor. Example of flexor is bicep. Example of extensor is tricep. There are other extensors and other flexors as well. These are not the only ones, by the way. This is just the type of the muscles. So here in the table, it says when bicep contract, the forearm, this is forearm, here, from here to here, forearm, flexes upward. True. And the stationary muscle, the bone, is the scapula, creating origin. True. And then the elbow bend. Yeah, there's an angle here. It's bending. While this contracts, of course the tricep relaxes. They are opposing pair. And while the tricep contracts, of course the bicep relaxes. But tricep makes sure that the arm is extended. And the scapula, of course, is stationary, doesn't move. But the elbow moves back to its original place because of tricep. This is how opposing pairs are working. Let's not forget it. Origin and insertions are point of attachment to bone. In case of the origin, it's a stationary bone. In case of insertion, is a movable bone. And then tendon, of course, it's a flexible connective tissue. These two, flexor and extensor, are muscle names on how they work. If a muscle bends a joint, we call the flexor. If a muscle straightens a joint, we will call it extensor. Here is the difference between bicep and tricep. They are opposite in types. This means opposite, but they are sharing same origin. Equal signs mean sharing and the similarity. And however, they are not similar in the insertion point. Okay? I think this is quite easy and you will enjoy learning about this. See, I told you about this. After each system we're talking about, there's always a medical thing happening. Either medical or disease or infection, anything related to it in this system, because this is making us learn about it more. So we have two things here, muscle fatigue and oxygen debt in the next page. Muscle fatigue is related to depletion by the way, يعني كمبنوة, decreasing of ATP, or you can say energy. If the person doesn't have energy, they will have muscle cramps and spasms, if you remember, and this is called muscle fatigue. But before we learn about these, we should know something. That body prioritizes using certain food over others. So the first one that is used by muscle especially is glucose. If you put glucose, lipids, other sugars, starch, everything out, the muscle is going to choose glucose first because it's very fast. Then, what if you don't have glucose? There's glycogen. Glycogen is glucose bind to another glucose, bind to another glucose. So it's like a storage of glucose. Just like if this is like a can of food, this is the box of canned food. You need to break it before it becomes glucose. So it's an extra step. And for that, glucose is still our priority. We will not open the new boxes unless we don't have the first one. So this is how body prioritizes it. Glucose, then glycogen. Glycogen is stored in two areas, either muscles, cells, or liver. Nothing else, okay? You can't find it in bone, you can't find it in anywhere else. These are the two sources of glycogen, at least in the book. See, the last one is fat. Fat is so stubborn for burning. So naturally, fat is burning very slowly. If you don't have glucose, nor you have glycogen, it takes a while to go over to the fat cells and start making them giving you energy. That's why if a person doesn't have any of these, they use all their glycogen content in the body and they are not eating, they're fasting, let's say, they most likely will encounter something called fatigue. So muscle fatigue happens because of lack of energy. That's what we said. Everything I mentioned just now, it's here. Remember, fat have, can burn only when you have vigorous exertion or like exercises. You should have very strong and like demanding exercises for it to burn. But, however, fat have more energy in it. You should know about that too. So what happens when there's no energy? Muscle fatigue. What is a muscle fatigue? Is a physiological inability of a muscle to contract, even though it receives nerve. So you have no problem with the nerve. You have problem with the content of the blood. There is not enough food to start the actions of contraction and relaxation. Remember, we need the ATP for detachment of myosin head for it to relax and we start it over again, or else you can't have it. So what happens to the muscles in the absence of ATP? They will remain in continuous contraction. Why? Because no ATP is letting the head to detach. So they remain in the same contractions. So they create severe cramping effect. And what are the sources of energy? These are the sequences of it. Remember, we have aerobic respiration. We studied this like all throughout our studying journey before grade 12 and especially in grade 11. It's how your muscles generate energy. The act of using oxygen to break down a glucose to create CO2 plus H2O, which is water. We have 6 this, 6 this, 6 that. See, in this point, in muscle fatigue, where is it? Okay. In muscle fatigue, we have a problem here. If you don't have this, you have muscle fatigue. But if you don't have enough oxygen available, you will end up with oxygen debt. Tamam? So, either you don't have this or you don't have that. Either one, it's going to mess up our equation. We're at oxygen debt, which is our last part of today's lesson. Oxygen debt is like its name. When you had a depletion of O2 at a moment. When does that happen? When oxygen is used extensively during an exercise. See, you're okay right now. Your body provides you enough oxygen for normal tasks. But when you start exercising, the demand of oxygen becomes more because you're doing more. So the body did not get adapted to this change. And what happens is that we need to change the pace of the breathing. But there is a delay. This act is not that fast, changing it and bringing more oxygen quickly. While you're still running and doing your exercises, you become out of breath. So what happened in that moment? See, when usage of oxygen is too much, the body will have less. And in aerobic, you need oxygen. But then oxygen is no longer there. You have to switch for a moment to anaerobic respiration. You can go back to grade 11 book if you don't know about this. But anaerobic respiration is using glucose in a pathway called fermentation without using of oxygen. This gives us a little amount of ATP, but it's enough. It's enough until the body gets regulated back in a few minutes and brings more oxygen, and then we can go back here. In that moment, when we went to anaerobic respiration, let's make it like that, anaerobic respiration, you will end up with a byproduct called lactic acid. The lactic acid is, it's like in yogurt. So imagine if your muscles have this acid, it makes more contractions because it's acid, and then it's giving you cramps and pain. And it gives you like this soreness feeling of like exercises. It's the buildup of that. However, lactic acid after a while goes to liver. Okay, goes to liver, and in liver it's gonna be broken down. But when When? Only after you stop the exercise, an extra amount of oxygen replaced, okay, replace the ones that were not there for a moment, to break down the lactic acid in the liver. So here what we learn is that even when you stop exercise, you're still panting. Why? Why this heavy breathing? It's because you're replacing that period of time that you did not have enough oxygen, and you need to break down that extra lactic acid that was created. Unless every lactic acid is gone, your breathing is never going to be normal again. So that takes a while, and that's why it takes a few minutes to stop panting and stop this heavy breathing that we have. So oxygen debt is a temporary lack of oxygen availability. It happens only when you do strenuous or strong exercises, heavy exercises. When does oxygen level in the body get depleted? Like we said, in heavy exercises. And then what impacts these oxygen debt is accumulation. Accumulation means piling up of lactic acid, which causes soreness. Here we said what causes soreness. It is the presence of the lactic acid. Another thing, how do you know the person is paying off their debt? Because even after they stopped and standing with you normally, they're still like that. That's how you know it's paying their debt, and they had lactic acid in their body. How's oxygen repaid? The quick additional, this is the panting I told you about, the quick additional breathing that provides more oxygen inside. Okay, why muscle soreness and aching persist while after an exercise? Because of what? The lactic acids, they are in the muscle, they have to be carried away to liver and getting converted or getting like burned in the aerobic pathway again. And this was the end of our section and chapter 1. Congratulations for finishing this chapter with me. Well done, everyone. And this is the answer key for this section review. I hope you get benefit of it. You can find my malzama or the handbook in Zhyar photocopy in the old Bahar Karod. I hope we're gonna see you in the next lesson. Have a nice day.